Hey guys, it's Ryan here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're going to be talking about the Wheel of Time. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the first fourth of this fourth novel here, The Shadow Rising. So, since this is the first time I talk about Wheel of Time on my channel in the, after 2 years of not talking about it, I do want to kind of introduce myself to the community again and kind of talk about where I'm coming from here. So before we get into the first part of the book here, I am going to talk about myself and my history with the Wheel of Time. So if you're not really interested in that, feel free to jump to the section that actually discusses this book. And it's going to be a spoiler discussion, so be aware of that. If you're not interested in that, feel free to click away. Thank you very much for clicking in the first place. And sadly, I couldn't provide you with what you needed, but I'm happy to try some other time. So, Wheel of Time, Shadow Rising, Part 1. Introduction here basically is that my history with the Wheel of Time is pretty short. It's not been very long since I started reading the Wheel of Time. I think the first Wheel of Time book that I picked up was actually in the spring, and then I realized that it was a prequel and that it didn't really have anything to do with the main story, and it was more just like extra info, and so I resold it. I got rid of it. Then when I moved into a new apartment, I ended up deciding to pick up the first novel. It was when I had just started getting into Brandon Sanderson, and I realized that Brandon Sanderson had to do with this novel series, and so I decided to pick up the Wheel of Time, the Eye of the World. I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really fun. It was a nice, kind of interesting kind of vibe to it. And I'm not a Lord of the Rings person. I've never seen the movies. I've never read the books. But I did know that, the general premise of the Lord of the Rings is pretty similar to the Eye of the World and basically every other kind of basic starting point for epic fantasy, right? So I didn't really have any issues with that. I found it to be pretty enjoyable. It was pretty confusing for certain parts of the story, but it was good. I liked it. Months later, I stumbled across a set of YouTube videos that were basically chapters from the audiobook, and so I decided to listen to them while I was doing other stuff. I really enjoyed my time with that, so I decided to read the book again, and then I picked up book 2, and then I picked up book 3, and I never finished book 3, so I decided to reread the series again from the beginning. A year before the show came out, I started chronicling that here on my channel because at that point I had already been doing YouTube videos for about a year and a half, I think, and so I started out with that. I read all 3 books in the first 3 books of the series. I really enjoyed them. I think my favorite one is the third one. I can't remember the name of it, but it is the third one. What's it called? The Dragon Reborn. That's my favorite one. Although when I think about the Wheel of Time, I mostly think about select moments in the Eye of the World and very specific kind of aspects of the Great Hunt. I really enjoy that. Like, I remember that book the most, even though I think I enjoyed The Dragon Reborn the most. Although, that's because what I liked about The Dragon Reborn was actually the female side of the story. Egwene, Elaine, Nynaeve, and their hunt for the Ajas, for the Black Aja. Like, that stuff was the stuff that I liked the most because it kind of gave me this, magic school vibe to it that I really enjoyed. And so the problem is that most of that is pretty minutia based. It's a lot of minimal kind of small moment type things, and so it's kind of difficult to remember. But remembering Rand kind of going into the dark ways and meeting Lanfear and stuff, that's easy to remember. That's kind of big moments of the book basically because it is most of the Great Hunt, and so I remember most things from that. But my favorite book is definitely The Dragon Reborn. So then I watched the show, and I was pretty happy with the show for the first 4 episodes, and then it all kind of went downhill. However, I gained a little bit more of an appreciation for the show when I watched it with my family, and I realized hey, this isn't really for me because I have an attachment to these books. I'm not that big of a fan, but the books are my preferred method, and I do like them quite a bit. And the show kind of does away with a lot of meaningful things about the books, but it is a pretty interesting starting point for non-fans because it kind of gives them a lot without giving them too much. And also, as long as you don't know the situation behind how the show ended up, butchering the books, you're going to find yourself pretty interested in it. And my parents still ask me, hey, when's the next season of that coming out? I recently told them it was coming out soon, and they're pretty happy with that. They're pretty excited about that. So, I don't hate the show. I don't love it. And I do think that they butchered a lot of things from the Eye of the World. And it was unnecessary to add the water stuff from the new Spring novel. And it was kind of shitty that, you know, Rand was supposed to be the Dragon Reborn at the end of the first season, and he was supposed to show off his powers, and then they decided to give it to Nynaeve and Egwene and kind of kill them off at the same time in some weird way. I don't know. There's a lot of issues with it, right? But in general, I really enjoy the Wheel of Time because it gives me a lot of like early Star Wars vibes, if that makes sense. So I like the fact that Rand and Egwene and Nynaeve and Perrin and Mat all kind of encompass this kind of like 20-year-old person that has this weird like 14-year-old naivete to them that is very similar to how like whiny Luke Skywalker was in The New Hope, right? In the New Hope movie. So I really like that type of character. It's a very rare type of character. And I really enjoy the male characters specifically because they have that energy, but I also really love the idea of like the kind of subversion of expectations from these character archetypes, you know, like the farmer turned, king aspect of Rand is cool. I like that. He's not really subversive all that much, honestly, except for the fact that he's going to go crazy. That's cool. The werewolf aspect of Perrin, because he basically is a werewolf, but he's not a werewolf. That's cool. The kind of rogue that has a good heart thing that was not really that common, and I still think it's not that common, that Mat has going for him is cool. The girl next door that actually just wants to go on an adventure, that is Egwene, that's fun too. The wise old woman character that actually happens to be a young Spitfire type woman is enjoyable too, and also the ridiculousness of having the old wizard actually be this like gorgeous tiny woman that is shadowed constantly by this giant stone-faced samurai guy. Like, that's all fun, right? And then the bard actually being a pretty meaningful character in the story is cool with Tom Maryland, right? So I really enjoy all of those aspects. But I think that because I was forcing myself to read the novels at a certain pace in order to get to reading them before the show, a lot of the enjoyment that I felt with them kind of got dragged away. And also the fact that I had basically read those novels like 4 times in a row with like very minimal breaks between them. Kind of felt kind of awkward. It didn't really drag me in the same way. I didn't really find myself enjoying it as much as I would have liked to. And so I ended up kind of forgetting about the Wheel of Time for a long time, for basically 2 years. And then because of the show coming back, I decided that I wanted to read the series again. Not necessarily force myself to read a certain amount of books before the start of the series, of the second season of the series. Just kind of get back into the world, ease myself back into the world. And so I decided to read this. And I actually had a plan. I was going to read like 50 pages of it just to gain momentum. And then if I could continue, I would. And if I didn't, I wouldn't. However, I ended up reading the first quarter of this book, right? So this book has 980 pages, I think. Let me see if I can remember here. 980 pages, so divided by 2 is 490. Divided by 2 again is 245. So I read the first 245 pages of this book in like a day, or 2 days actually, because it's been like 3 days since I last read them. So yeah, basically the first 2 days of August, at night, I would just sit down and read, a little bit at a time, and eventually ended up reading 300 pages worth of the novel, and so I want to talk about it. So let's get into it here. Let's finally start the discussion. Sorry if it took too long to kind of introduce myself, but yeah, if you weren't interested and then you jumped in, welcome. I hope you guys enjoy this part of the story, or this part of the video. So yeah, in terms of my general thoughts, it was really nice to come back to this world. It almost felt kind of comforting in a sense, even though the world that we're kind of living in this book is actually kind of like crumbling at the seams. Like, everyone is like desperate to figure out what they're going to do with their life because everything is kind of just like not how it should be. But there was a certain level of comfort that I associated with the story, with this series, that I was very happy to return to after quite a few years of not doing that. And also, it's been a long time since I properly sat down to read an epic fantasy type story. Most of the novels that I've read in the last 2 years have actually been like pulp novels, mostly Edgar Rice Burroughs type novels, John Carter of Mars, Tarzan, stuff like that. And those have a specific kind of movie feel to them that epic fantasy doesn't really have. Epic fantasy has a much more atmospheric vibe to it. And so it was really nice to come back to that. I really enjoyed that aspect of that. And I don't really know how to explain the soft comfort that I felt, because I don't know how to say it without words that sound negative. Like if I told you I enjoyed the slow methodicalness of it, you'd feel like, why are you enjoying a boring book? The thing is that it's not boring. I really enjoy the minutia of things. I really enjoy the fact that Robert Jordan takes the time to tell us every time a woman smooths her skirts or tugs her hair or puts her hands under her boobs. Like, I don't know. I like, or just like Rand and Matt like saying stupid shit and then being like, damn, I shouldn't have said that. If the other guys were here, they would have been better about it. Like, I don't know. I just really like the ridiculous amount of detail that Robert Jordan put in his books. And so it's very nice to have this very slow kind of vibe to it, that is, you know, not boring, because it is all building to something. It's just that the build is very shallow. It's very slow, right? It's not this like crazy peak and then it falls off. I really just enjoy that. It was really satisfying to kind of have that happening, right? So yeah, the break from the story from the series was actually really helpful. I quite happy that I did take that break, that I took my time to return to the story. And now that I'm back, hopefully I don't have to end up taking any more breaks that are that long, and I can slowly chug through the books and enjoy the story for what it is. So yeah, part of that is actually making these videos the way they are now, where I'm kind of structuring them into sections instead of just talking about the whole book, because I remember struggling a lot with the fact that I would read the whole book and then I'd be like, fuck, now I have to talk about the whole book. And many times I lost a lot of info, where I went back to look for it, and then it felt like a lot of ridiculous things happened, right? So it was kind of difficult to manage that. So hopefully talking about it like this is it's a little bit easier to manage. So yeah, let's actually run down through the book now. So the story starts with Min, and she's actually going on her way to Tar Valon to meet with the Amerlin seat. And the whole time she's like cursing Rand. She's like, damn it, why'd you send me here? And honestly, I didn't remember what happened in the previous books. It's been 2 years, like I said. So I was kind of just going with it. I was like, okay, whatever. I don't really need to know. I will eventually remember what was happening. So I just kept reading, and I was like a little bit confused, but also aware of what's going on. Basically, Min had to go tell the Amerlin seat something. And Rand had kind of asked her to go away, but also Moraine had told her to do something. And the point was basically to tell the Amerlin seat something. And also, while Min was there, she was seeing that everyone was dying, basically, or everyone was about to die. There was a certain level of certainty to the fact that death was coming to most of the Aes Sedai, right? And so she tells the Amerlin seat this, and then the Swan Sanche decides to manipulate her into helping her, like she does with just about everyone that isn't an Aes Sedai that she's friends with. And so she kind of twists the fact that Min likes Rand or loves Rand in order to force her to help her in such a way. And so she ends up having to use her real name and actually dress like a girl for once. And I think that's kind of funny. But also it's kind of just like, okay, it's all set up. It's going to come back, in 2 books from now. It doesn't really matter when. I'll just try to remember that, right? So we move on there, and then we go back to the Stone of Tyr, where basically everyone is there, and people are having difficulties with the fact that, hey, what are we going to do now that Rand is a dragon, that Rand is actually kind of having to run a kingdom, and the people here kind of suck. They're all kind of shitty assholes. So yeah, actually we do finally get some action here after quite a few pages of just kind of Min meandering around the tower, when Perrin and Faeli, I don't remember how to say her name, get attacked by his axe, which is kind of interesting. I really like the symbolism here of Perrin getting attacked by his axe, the one thing that he's not really sure about himself with, or the one thing that identifies him in a way that he doesn't want. And then this happening to Matt later on, where he's like, he's attacked by cards, which I think mean his power, or like represent his power, which is kind of manipulating games of chance, right? Which is another thing that he's not really sure about, because it causes him a lot of problems with the fact that he actually can't remember things about himself, because he has this weird like General Patton type kind of like multi-generational kind of memory about all of these great warriors, right? All of the stuff that he has in his head is kind of weird. And then Rand, of course, is attacked by himself because that's what he has issues with. That is what is causing him emotional turmoil, right? And so it's really interesting to have them attacked by representations of what makes them unsure about themselves. So I really like that. I thought that was really, really cool. It was really crazy shit, and I liked what was going on there. The aftermath of this is actually pretty interesting because Rand is finally coming into his own. He's not letting Moiraine kind of pull his chain or drag his leash, as it were. And she gets infuriated with him. She gets angry because it's like, dude, I'm trying to help you, but you're just not letting me. But also, Moiraine is kind of not really admitting to the fact that no one wants her help because she kind of just drags them along, and it's kind of annoying to these young people that are used to their freedoms, suddenly being forced to follow the edicts of this woman that they're inherently afraid of because of the stories that they were told as children, right? So it's pretty interesting. I really enjoy their dynamic because we are slowly seeing them kind of get to the point where they'll probably be pretty good partners or pretty good kind of, not necessarily friends, but like colleagues in a sense in the future. And at least that's what I think is kind of happened here. I mean, I kind of know that eventually Moiraine does become like an important member of Rand's kind of circle from just, looking at a bunch of Wheel of Time videos in my time, but I'm not really sure how. But I like to see this kind of like, this kind of change that's happening because Rand is growing up, basically, and how Moraine's going to have to change her ways in order to kind of help him and kind of join with him, right? So I really like that. I think it's really interesting. Then the boys are uncertain, and they're mostly uncertain about leaving, and because they're uncertain of the fact that, hey, do we leave? Does that make us bad friends? But also, are we even friends with Rand anymore because he's the dragon, he has other shit going on? Are we really important enough to him? And also, do we need to care about him? Are we part of the problem? Like there's a lot of things that are wrong with them, that are wrong around their situation, that they're just really uncertain about. And I really like that. I think it's interesting. I think Perrin's kind of desire to stay with Rand or to kind of not necessarily leave, but at least get Fail away is interesting. I'm not really sure why he's so attached. Like, I'm not really sure if it's honor, because I don't think that Perrin necessarily ascribes to stuff like that, or if it's just like, you're my friend. The situations around our stuff right now doesn't matter. The point is that you're my friend, so I'll stay. Or if it's some other thing, I'm not really sure. Sometimes I feel like I'm not really being literate enough with my understanding of the book, and I think that's because I'm comparing it to my previous experiences where I've read the books more than once, and this is literally my first time engaging with this stuff, and so sometimes I kind of miss things. So I think I missed something with Perrin there. But Matt, his feelings are very different, but also kind of end up in the same place where it's like, damn it, Rand is so different from me now, so I can't really relate to him, and everything that I do around him just gets me in trouble, so I don't want to be here anymore. But at the same time, I can't leave him because he's been my friend forever. But also, am I even actually wanting to stay, or is it just the pattern forcing me to remain because I'm a stupid tavern and Rand is a stronger one than I? And I really like their issues there. I think they're interesting, and I like that. So yeah, then we see that the girls are working to interrogate these two Dark Aja members. They're Black Aja members. Joya, I think. I want to say Hoya, like a jewel in Spanish, but I don't think that's her name. And the other one is called Amiko, I think. She has like a Japanese sounding last name, but I don't know how to say her first name. Amiko and Joya. It's basically a lot of setup for later that actually gets paid off in this first part of the story, because they keep telling them stuff, go to Tanchico, and then a bunch of nonsense. And the girls don't really believe them, but they've been at it for so long, they've been saying the same thing, that really there's no other option but to kind of listen to what they're saying, or to continue to ignore them, right? And so it's kind of interesting. Eventually, Moiraine shows up. And while Moiraine does her Moiraine things, and she kind of picks what people are going to do without telling them what they're, or without giving them a choice. And so this angers the girls. And of course, there's kind of an power imbalance between them, but also not as much, because while they're at tier, they have all decided to act like they're full on Aes Sedai instead of just students. And so it almost feels like they have gotten used to being a little bit more respectful to each other. And so Moraine isn't exactly as tough as she usually is about things. And so it's kind of interesting how their relationship has changed as well. Eventually, Moraine discusses the issues that Rand has been facing and the fact that war might be necessary because it'll strengthen his position in certain ways, but also that it's kind of a harsh reality, right? And then they talk about their feelings, which is kind of interesting. Moraine mentions that she probably knows the face of the man she's going to marry much more clearly than any of the girls here, even though she thinks about it far less, which is kind of interesting. I didn't really think that Moraine would actually bother with romance. And if she did, I mean, Lan is right there, and she's been forever with him. I don't see why they wouldn't have a relationship if they're basically tied to each other's souls, right? But since Lan is with Nynaeve, I guess that makes sense. That they wouldn't have a relationship together. And the girls are kind of surprised by this, of course. And then it turns out that Elaine is afraid of the fact that Balerion, a woman from Maine, I think is what it's called, was in Rand's bedchamber before he was attacked. And the fact that she actually loves Rand, and she's afraid of the confrontation that will come when Egwene realizes this. And so they have a heart-to-heart there. And basically Egwene's like, dude, I don't love Rand anymore. I've grown out of my love for him. Even though I still love him as a brother, he's all yours. Now we just have to go tell him. I think this is fun and interesting, and kind of slightly more mature than you're expecting from these characters, because Robert Jordan has a tendency to write them kind of like CW type romances, and a little bit of angst and a little bit of ridiculousness and a lot of naivety. But this feels a little bit more adult, more serious, more realistic, I guess, or more adult, if that makes sense, about how they're dealing with this. And so I like that aspect as well. And then they talk about Ter Angriels, because the Stone of Tyr has a giant room that just has a bunch of shit like that's in it, kind of like the Come and Go room, but it's all just like Saidin and Saidar type stuff. I think this is when they get introduced to the Red Door, or to the Red Arch, or whatever it's called. It's basically this red thing that you can walk into, get questions and answers for, and then leave. And depending on your questions, you might die, because if they're frivolous, the thing punishes you, right? So it's kind of interesting. And this is also set up for later. Eventually, Egwene and Elaine go to Rand. They talk to him. They actually go there with the pretense of helping him channel. And they do kind of have a way in which they learn something about each other. But it's mostly the fact that men and women channel completely differently. Apparently, I think this is the first time we learn about it, where women channel the power by submitting to it, by allowing it to flow through them, whereas men channel the power by dominating it, which, okay, BDSM terminology, whatever. Robert Jordan was a bit weird. He's a bit kinky about his stuff, but men basically have to pull the power into them. And I think that's interesting. It's cool. It does fall in line with this kind of differentiation of genders. It's very clear in the story, that I think is interesting, because it doesn't put one above the other, or at least not inherently. It does at the beginning of the story, because women have the ability to cast magic and men don't, and so there is a natural imbalance there. But that has not been an imbalance that's been there forever. It's one that is currently there. And regardless of that, in general, normal areas, because of this imbalance, kind of, it feels like there's more equality, and I really enjoy that balance, and I think it's interesting that it has so much balance while also being inherently gendered about how it kind of goes about things, right? So it's kind of interesting how Robert Jordan does that. So anyway, they go to Rand, they talk about the power, they kind of try to deal with that. They can't, and so eventually they just talk about their feelings. Egwene tells Rand, I can no longer marry you. I do not feel the same way that I thought I did back then. And Rand is like, finally, I can admit that as well. I don't feel like that either. And so they kind of end up, and it's really interesting that Robert Jordan takes the time to tell you that Rand is happy that this situation has resolved itself, because he can move on, but also he's inherently sad about the fact that he has been rejected, which is a really interesting and very honest kind of examination of feelings. Because yes, sometimes you get in relationships and maybe it's time to go on, but it doesn't mean that you cut off ties easily and without remorse or without feelings that are negative, right? And I really find this to be very meaningful. I like that a lot. I think it's really, really good. And it's not necessarily like your standard kind of like coming of age type story. Like, it doesn't tackle your basic coming of age things, but it is a thing that I think is very important to talk about in coming of age stories that we really ever see in fantasy. So I really like that aspect. I thought that was really, really good. And I thought it was great. So yeah, that happens, and then Rand forgets that Elaine's there, and then he realizes that she's there, so they talk, and then Elaine is like, okay, I'm just gonna tell you I like you, and then they kiss, and it was a pretty good scene. I quite liked it. I thought it was really interesting. It's kind of weird, but also it works. And then eventually the High Lords of Tyr show up, and Rand is distracted. He doesn't care what the fuck they're talking about. He's thinking about Egwene and Elaine and Min, and his feelings and what he's gonna do with his life and how this happens, right? And I also like that Rand doesn't bother to think about the issues of being the dragon when it comes to Elaine. And I'm not really sure if that's because he hasn't really gotten to that point where he's like, oh shit, I'm the dragon. I can't be with anyone or anyone I actually care about. Or it's more like he has so many emotions hitting him right now that he hasn't had time to process to get to that point. And I think it's interesting. And eventually Rand gets the High Lords to do something for him. And what they do isn't really important. Just that Rand kind of uses his authority to get them to do it. And he continues to think about this. And so eventually Rand and Elaine have 3 moments of beautiful, kind of easygoing, childish romance between them before shit hits the fan and it goes crazy. And I like that. Also, while this is happening, Egwene and Matt have a conversation where she introduces the concept of this red tangriel or ter'angriel to Matt, and so eventually he's gonna walk through it because of course he is, because he's dumb. Even though he says he doesn't want any Aes Sedai shit, he always ends up kind of going towards it, right? So it is what it is. Then there's these moments of peace, the 3 days of peace, but there's not really peace. It's kind of like this uneasy kind of like moments of silence, of calm before the storm. And so when the storm comes, it's horrifying. And it starts with Selene, with Lanfear showing up and trying to take Rand with the carrot approach instead of the stick, right? And it doesn't work, but it almost kind of feels like it might have. If Rand was a little bit less wool-headed, he would definitely have gone with Lanfear, with Selene. I mean, I would definitely go with her. But it is what it is. Rand is the stronger man than I am, I guess. And so the stone gets attacked, and it's actually a horrifying battle. Death surrounds them all. Rand actually summons a sword made of fire, and he uses it, but then he leaves Kalandor behind. And then Lanfear's like, dude, I mean, do whatever you want, but if you leave that sword there, any other male channeler can grab it. You're not the only one, now that you've released it from the stone, right? And so he rushes back to get it, and he grabs it, and I'm a little bit confused because when Rand summons the Sword of Fire, it's red, and when he uses Kalandor, it also fills with fire, but I don't know what color it is. Even though in the pictures of the books, it sometimes looks blue, and I'm not sure if that's Kalandor or that's just his light sword. I'm not really sure. And I think it's because the Heron blade at this point has been destroyed, or he doesn't have it anymore, because he melted it into his hands at one point. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he now uses the fire swords. He has lightsabers, and it's cool and it's pretty interesting. And so eventually the battle is won. It's hard won. It's difficult and it's horrible, but it happens, and they move on. And Rand finally reaches a conclusion about what he's gonna do. And so that's what it is. Eventually we move on. The girls are getting ready to go to bed, and actually they're going into the dreaming world because they want to scope out Tanchico before they decide what to do. And so Egwene, being the best one at it, goes in, and she actually meets an AO and a wise one from the IEO, and she gives her name. Her name is Anis, and she summons Egwene. She's like, meet me at this place in the IEO Waste, and I will teach you. And so Egwene decides to go there, and Aviendha gets pulled into this, and she has to go with her as well, due to a note that recently arrived to Moraine. But Aviendha doesn't want to go with her. I'm not really sure why. I can't remember exactly what the issue is. I think Aviendha has to do something with the Wise Ones, but she doesn't want to because she's a shield maiden or a spear maiden. I can't remember what they're called. And so she doesn't want to be led around by the nose like just about every other teenage character in the story. And so she kind of wants to forge her own path, and she's not being allowed to, right? So yeah, eventually, they decide that, and then Nynaeve and Elaine are going to go to Tanchico to see what's going on there. And so that's kind of the choice that they kind of finish up with, right? And then the last kind of important thing here is that Mat and Perrin hear that the Two Rivers are going to soon be attacked by the White Cloaks, and this is a problem. This is difficult for them to deal with, and it's something that means that Perrin has to go back home to, because they're basically hunting him, since he's the associated dark friend, basically, that the White Cloaks think is out and about. And so they're going straight to the Two Rivers to see him, but they know his name, so the whole village might be destroyed because they're harboring a dark friend, even though Perrin is, all the way in Tyr. And so he decides to rush home, and he needs Oiger help. He needs Loyal, because he needs to use the gateways, or the traveling doors to get home quickly, so that he can avoid the bloodshed as much as he can. Mat kind of wants to go with him, but also can't. I'm not sure why. I can't remember exactly the details behind Mat's reluctance, but I think he will eventually decide to go. I feel like he should. And then Rand turns out to know this as well. And so I'm guessing that Rand is going to fly back to the Two Rivers as well, and that's kind of what his conclusion is. But I'm not really sure. I'm not exactly aware of how this is going to go. And then the story kind of concludes here. This part of the story concludes with Berelain, or Bellarine. I don't know how to say her name. The super hot chick that barely wears any clothes, that wanted to get with Rand initially, and then she got scared of him when he channeled around her. She walks into Perrin's room, and she tries to kind of put the moves on him, and he doesn't accept. And then Fael shows up, and Fael and Bellarine fight, and then Rogue, I don't know how to say his name, the AO man, shows up and humiliates both of them, and manages to make peace. And so that's the last thing I read. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. I'm very interested in what's going to happen next. I've loved what I've been reading. It's been really fun and really enjoyable, and I'm very happy to have come back to the Wheel of Time. So yeah, that's what's been happening here. Those are my thoughts on the story. So let me know what you guys thought. Let me know if you guys have been reading this book as well this month, and if not, when did you last read it? Let me know that in the comments, and thank you so much for watching, and see you guys later.